A short while back, I built a Novel Keys NK87 for my wife, and she was really happy with it, and I was really happy with building it. But I couldn't just get her a new keyboard and not get one for myself. So, given that it was my birthday recently, I decided to treat myself. I also got lucky with a couple of artisan raffles recently that I think will fit this build perfectly. So, let's get right into it. Given that this was a spur of the moment build, this keyboard had to satisfy three criteria. One, it had to be in stock. Two, it had to be a 60 or 65%. And three, it had to match GMK Oblivion, which is a keycap set that I've had for a while now, but I've never really had a home for it, or I've never really had a keyboard that it's stayed on. Oblivion is a special keycap set to me because it was the first real group buy that I participated in, and it has a special meaning to me given my history as a software engineer and developer. Now, I first noticed Oblivion in Teha Type's Fiel and Holy Panda video, and Bakeneko has done a really great job of keeping them in stock. Well, I guess an okay job, because when I went to go buy one, they didn't have any. Now, I'm sure, like a lot of other companies, they're suffering from complications due to COVID, supply chain issues, things like that. So I can't really fault them too much, and I should have just pulled the trigger when I had the chance. But rather than wallow in self-pity over my favorite keyboard not being in stock, I decided to go with a Bakeneko 65, as I've been hearing nothing but good things about this keyboard ever since the release of its smaller version, the Bakeneko 60. This is an O-ring mounted keyboard, which is pretty different from traditional tray mounted keyboards and the more recently popular gasket mounted keyboards. It uses an O-ring around the PCB and plate assembly to provide friction inside the chassis and hold the assembly inside the case. This provides a softer, bouncier typing feel, as when you're making contact, it's a rubber O-ring as opposed to metal on metal or plastic on metal. Canon Keys has done something pretty incredible here, offering this mounting style in a keyboard that is pretty accessible to most people. They also offer a couple of different O-rings on their website, giving you a lot of options in the realm of customizing your Bakeneko. The stock one it comes with is basically a medium firmness, while they have softer and harder ones available. While a different mounting style may sound confusing at first, this is really a simple and straightforward build. You have your PCB, your plate, your stabilizers, a daughter board, a JST cable, and the O-ring. That's it. There's no screws, nothing to hold one thing to another, with the exception of the O-ring. We're going to start with the stabilizers here because Canon Keys includes clip-in stabilizers over screw-in stabilizers. The reason for this is certain switches don't allow for screw-in stabilizers, as they would interfere with the O-ring. So I just went ahead and used all clip-in stabilizers. I wasn't going to mess around or try to mix them up. And the ones they include are pretty great. After installing your stabs, you can get to work on the switches, and again, because there's no screws or anything, this is pretty straightforward. You pop in your switches, and the friction from the hot swap socket holds the PCB and plate assembly together. Once you're done installing your switches, you just mount your O-ring, you make sure your daughter board is installed with the provided screws, and you're ready to go. Given that there isn't anything securing the PCB assembly to the chassis, you might think that it might be loose or it might fall out if you turn it upside down, but I didn't run into that problem whatsoever. My assembly was not moving, even if I tried really hard to get it to come out. In fact, removing it was a little tricky, only because I wanted to be extra careful because I didn't want to damage anything. Of the keyboards I built, this is definitely the easiest and quickest build I've ever done. The included FR4 plate gives a real nice, crispy, poppy sound when paired with a GMK keycap set. Given the simplicity of the build and the internal chassis, this really opens things up to allow for pretty extensive modifications. The Bakeneko 65 comes in two versions, one with a silicone insert and one with a zinc metal insert. The silicone version costs $149, while the zinc version costs $169. I ended up with the zinc version because it was the only one they had in stock, and the extra metal inside the case does seem to affect the sound profile a little bit, so I ended up ditching it altogether. After that, when I was left with an empty chassis, I started experimenting. I tried foam, I even made my own silicone inserts, I tried the tape mod, pretty much all of the things you could think of. I ended up settling on my custom silicone insert, which really did a great job of dampening that case ping that I was talking about. And my final build ended up being a foam dampener that I made in between the plate and PCB, and then my custom silicone insert underneath that. And I love the way this keyboard looks and sounds. One of my favorite things about this keyboard is that it covers the switch entirely, like none of the switch is exposed. All you see is a keycap. And considering most like retail boards usually have an exposed switch or a floating switch design, I love seeing this. And it, for whatever reason, it pairs really well with artisans too, when they just seem to be popping out of the case. I just love that so much. There are plenty of keyboards out there with raised bezels, but oftentimes you'll see just a little bit, just a peek of the switch, and that drives me crazy. I've spent a lot of time with this board over the past few weeks, and I've gone through a ton of revisions, just adding materials or adding polyfill or adding foam and taking away, adding tape, whatever, just to see if I could get it just perfect, just the way I wanted it. And so I ended up having a ton of fun modding this keyboard, and I think a lot of other people do too. If you do end up going that route, just make sure that you're leaving enough clearance in the bottom chassis because there isn't a ton of room down there. And this is just what I've done with this keyboard. If you spend any time on Google looking up the Bakeneko, you will see that there are plenty of people out there doing their own custom mods to this keyboard. So your possibilities are really endless. I ended up being really happy with this board, and I really think it's worth checking out for your next build. There are certainly no shortages of affordable custom mechanical keyboards these days. It's really a buyer's market right now. And there's a lot of competition, especially in the 60 and 65% form factor. But with the O-ring mounting system, I think you're getting something really special that proves that it's different than any other normal 65% keyboard. If there was some kind of scale for keyboards, I believe you'd have budget builds over here, then you'd have your more advanced keyboards over here. And just after the budget builds, you'd find the Bakeneko. Just slightly more complex than some of the beginner stuff that's out there. But it doesn't cost enough to make your wife or your partner leave you. Including keycaps and switches, this build ended up costing me around $350, which is pretty steep considering that the GMK keycap set ate up a pretty big portion of that. And these days there are plenty of other really well-built keycap sets out there for much cheaper. Stuff at the Key Company, Novel Keys, all of that stuff paired with the Bakeneko would end up for a really nice keyboard that's worth every penny. I think if you're interested in mechanical keyboards and you've built one, maybe two keyboards before, but you're looking for something a little more advanced, but you're not quite ready to spend the big bucks yet, this is definitely a keyboard worth looking at. I really, really like the minimalist design of this board, and if you're coming from some of the more gaming-centric brands, this is certainly a breath of fresh air if you're looking for a minimalist setup. This isn't the Fiel I wanted to build for my birthday, but it's certainly a nice placeholder until I can get my hands on one. Oh wait, there's one.